Airing in 2019, The Rising of the Shield Hero was the isekai of the year that garnered the most praise from viewers, but with it came some questionable story beats. This series did not shape up to be your typical isekai. Well, for some part anyway. A story that takes the protagonist and transfers them to another world because some imminent danger they have to prevent. Real original, I know. But hear me out. The way the Shield Hero executes that idea is through a more matter-of-fact lens. One that stirs controversy. So I decided to rewatch the first season of Shield Hero, as it was one of my favorite series on the first watch when it initially aired, and still is today. 4 years later, with an older mind, a more aged taste for anime, and first watch hype notwithstanding, let's see how the first season actually holds up. The story introduces our main character, Naofumi Iwatani, in modern day Japan, where he's really fucking close to being a NEET. He picks up a book called The Records of the Four Cardinal Heroes, containing a world that has these frequent disasters called the Waves of Catastrophe, and 4 heroes that have specific weapons to save it. A hero of the sword, spear, bow, and shield. Lo and behold, seconds later, Naofumi gets isekai'd into the world inside of it. I guess Truck couldn't miss the memo. Nevertheless, Naofumi, along with 3 other guys, Motoyasu Kitamura, Ranamaki, and Itsuki Kawasumi, are forced to take on the role as the set of heroes he just read about, with Naofumi specifically being the shield hero. The 4 of them are tasked by the nation's king to get stronger to defeat those waves of catastrophe. I'll just be calling them waves from now on. To do that, they need to go adventuring with their own parties, since them fighting too close in proximity to one another halts all of their growth. And you can't have an isekai without a party. Okay, you get where the shield hero part of the title comes in. What about the rising part? Well, you see, Naofumi got drawn the short stick and no one wants to join him for some unknown reason. All except one. Enter Mine. The one girl that was gracious enough to join the Shield Hero's party. Gracious enough to steal all of his money, armor, and frame him for the big red R word. Of which, for your information, he didn't do, by the way. But the other heroes didn't believe that. They all just collectively went, "Oh, she looks hot. We gotta take her word for it." And so Naofumi was a convicted hero. I mean criminal. Convicted criminal. All of this while he's still tasked to save the world from the upcoming wave attacks and being forced to use a non-lethal weapon in combat. Only thing that changed after the incident is that now he's poor, has no armor, nor a reputation, and still forced to use a non-lethal weapon in combat. So how can he fight? He can barely do any meaningful damage to a balloon, which is the equivalent of an early level slime. So how the fuck is he going to make himself stronger without any money and a reputation that's in the dirt? Slavery. Ah, yes. As if a whole nation being convinced that a holy hero R-wording a woman wasn't bad enough. Gotta drag that name through more dirt. He decides to buy a slave. You might ask, how did he end up here? He met some guy in a dark alley and followed him into a tent. Yep, that happened. Slaves in this world are typically monsters or demi-humans, which are human-monster half-breeds. Only reason for the demi-humans being slaves is because some countries being human supremacists, so when you guessed it, racism. How slaves are made into slaves is by placing a blood seal on them that if they choose to disobey an order given to them, they will feel a shock of pain, so as to push them into following orders out of fear, but not force. Naofumi picks a sickly demi-human in the corner that he sympathizes with, and that is how we have the local best girl, Raftalia. He later buys another slave, but this time a monster called a Philolial named Phila, with a striking resemblance to a chocobo from Final Fantasy that he won through a gacha. A slave that also ends up being another girl, both of which are underage. Clearly, only the best practices are being shown here. Alright, before we go on further, let's talk about the issue. I promise you Naofumi is actually a really nice guy, despite what some of his later actions would have you believe. But he's a good guy, just really misunderstood. Naofumi never abuses this power that he has of the girls that are getting more and more attached to him by the episode, with one even wanting to have romantic relations with him.
No! Master Naofumi, we can't kiss! I'll end up being pregnant!
Okay, so maybe there is a bigger issue at hand, but Naofumi never indulges those thoughts, because he only sees them as daughters. Checkmate, atheist! Actually, quite literally in this case. This is admittedly one of the more iffier parts of the series, even getting the other heroes to question Naofumi's moral alignment. Now, I personally don't advocate or support slavery, but it's not as if Naofumi had that many options. He was literally robbed of everything he had. Money, offense, and reputation in a situation where he needed all of those things to defend the very nation that took all of those things away from him in the first place, without knowing about the existence of the waves in other nations. Tell me, what else could have been his play here? Now, you could fault the author as for why he's stuck in this rut, but looking at the content that already exists here, yes, Naofumi isn't morally green as of this point in the story, but that's just it. This point of the story. You could choose to focus on him seeing slavery as legal in Melromark and coercing loopholes in that same nation's law, or how Naofumi is helping better the lives of those same discriminated demi-humans and saving the rest of the world along with it. And for this being slavery, he treats them rather well, fulfilling their basic needs to survive with food, clothing, shelter, and raising them to be strong and independent to defend for themselves for when he decides to leave this world. All of the qualities of a good parent. As for how he obtained them, maybe not so much, but after that, the plot point of slavery being in here might be blown significantly out of proportion. Like I said before, Naofumi never abuses his power over the girls. Actually, I shouldn't say never, but the only times he does is to give Raftelia a push of confidence to fight for the survival of both her and Naofumi because of an oversight he made when assessing their ability to clear a dungeon. The other time was when Philo wouldn't come out of hiding, so Naofumi just used the curse seal to ping her like you would a car in a crowded parking lot.
Philo! Get out here now! This is an order!
Oh, why are you being such a meanie, Master?
It's your fault for not coming when I call.
However, Raftelia doesn't see it as a curse in any sense. You see, the spear hero, Motoyasu, had caught wind of Naofumi using slaves to fight for him. And as any self-respecting hero would do, Motoyasu wanted to emancipate said slave. To which, Raftelia just calls him out for being a dick. Because, you know, freedom is obviously bad. Yeah, but seriously, Raftelia wanted to replace it immediately as a sign of trust to Naofumi, since she felt he still wasn't in the mindset to trust anything in this world yet. The anime adaptation doesn't emphasize how much Naofumi's actively against her wanting to reapply the seal, since he acknowledges her resolve to stay with him even after having the slave seal removed. See, there is some wholesomeness in this. In some twisted sense. Of course, I might have some heat coming for not outright refusing the idea of slavery in this series, but what happens here is really only a big talking point for 5 episodes. And one of the later ones that I'll get to, because that one is oh so cathartically sweet! But the point is, the main focus of the series as of Season 1 is the waves of catastrophe that the heroes were summoned there to deal with. This whole ordeal is more or less a means to a cause due to the circumstances Naofumi has to deal with. Is it wrong? Most definitely yes. Should it not have been an element of the plot at all? Maybe. Considering that it is just a part of the story, it did result in some great character development. As the shield hero, Naofumi did in fact rise. He rose straight from having absolutely no one that he can trust to having a good handful of those that support his efforts, as well as having earned his trust along with it, including one of the biggest figures in the nation in Melty, the second princess of Melromark, who's not as much of a prick as the first. I promise. I know this was a long segment, but if I didn't mention it here, I would have gotten grilled for it. As I mentioned before, this whole debacle is a small part in the entirety of Shield Hero. So let's talk about some overarching parts of the narrative. The heroes. I briefly glossed over the other heroes and how they believed in the words of a woman right away, without any benefit of the doubt for Naofumi. Yeah, that level of idiocy is not a one-time occurrence. They all have their own personalities. You know, as all prevalent characters should. But Motoyasu, Ren, and Itsuki might as well have the same personality archetypes. All of them go so far up their own asses, with very minute differences. When they were first isekai'd, they tried to share any prior knowledge they had playing video games to help each other out with getting stronger in this new world. It was then that they realized that they were from different Japans with different games that were popular in their own world. What this means is that they can't agree on anything another one of them said, except for the tank archetype always being the worst in the endgame. Well, sucks to suck, Naofumi. Okay, but no. The point is, they are so up their own asses about being right that they never think to at least try one of the other heroes' ideas, which later on ends up with them getting their shit handed to them by the simplest of enemies, save for Naofumi. But I'm not there yet. Let's slow down for a moment and go through each of them, because I think some context will be needed, especially for what's coming in the 3rd season. Before that though, let's get the biggest elephant in the room some personal space, lest they call anyone else out for committing NESA. Mine's Sophia. aka Multi Mark. Multi practically defines the word bitch. Thanks to her, this page won't be empty anymore. But legit, any bitch you can ever imagine has not bitched to the level of this bitch. Honestly, on the second watch, I found her character somewhat entertaining. How she would try to wriggle out of situations using the same copy-paste methods from the very beginning. Just throwing Naofumi under the bus was enough for her plans to work out, since the nation of Melromark just detests a shield hero without the need for any context behind his actions. On top of that, she basically had the Prince Charming of the heroes wrapped around her finger because he was too busy shrimping to notice. Basically, the popular high school bully that's part of the rich kids club. The one that you don't want to fight against because you think they have some power over you. It's probably because she's so similar to the high school bully with her pettiness that gets her the unanimous hate among viewers. Not that I get that or anything, because I was too much of a weeb by that point. Moving on to Motoyasu. You can blame a lot of what happened to Naofumi on a lot of things, but Motoyasu was definitely a big part of it. Motoyasu is, long story short, a himbo. A complete idiot that is generally attractive in appearance. Now, to make the long story long, Motoyasu is essentially what you get if you were to look at a male otaku college student, if they were seen as cool. Has a decent understanding of online games, and of course, has his own waifus. But as the character, those two things are cranked up to the max. He is so up his own ass about his game knowledge that they both have a big ego about it and refuse to listen to normies about the world they've just been transported to. This applies to Ren too, but we'll get to that one later. On the other hand, we've got this incessant womanizer behavior that just screams toxic testosterone to everyone in his vicinity, except he's the one sucking up. You give that same guy a position where he has some level of authority over regular people, and what do you get? A yes man. Motoyasu is a woman's yes man. Moreover, Melromark's yes man. Is this to say that he's a bad guy? No. Not at all. He's actually more chill than most will give him credit for. But it's because of the fact that he's a shrimp, and the one that he was simping over was some bitch with authority, that Naofumi ended up in his situation. That's not to say that the other heroes weren't to blame either. Ren also has complete confidence in his understanding of the world, but there's a key difference between him and Motoyasu. He likes to play the lone wolf, the type that wants to solo carry everything in a game. I know what one of your possible questions are, so I'll just answer it for you. Yes, he is the youngest of the heroes, coming in at 16 years old. Prime edgy high schooler phase. Does it make sense? Sure. But is it any less annoying? Well, kinda. See, Ren himself isn't necessarily a bad person, and I should reiterate, none of the heroes are bad. But with that statement comes an asterisk. Even with Naofumi, Ren has no sense of cause and consequence, with the belief that this world is strictly a video game, and that all the normal mechanics of a video game are there, like how he can respond if something goes wrong. However, in reality, he believed that a dragon's corpse would just despawn after killing it, instead of it rotting and spreading a deadly virus to a nearby village, which led to Naofumi having to come and clean up his mess. Yeah, that happened. So he's not exactly scot-free. To his credit though, he doesn't really do anything to fuck with Naofumi. He just piggybacks off the other heroes so that he isn't seen as the bad one. Something that is deeply ingrained in this country. Ren is actually just an edgy weeb stuck in his own gaming fantasy. Guy thinks he's the protagonist of this story. Ha! However, he was the first to notice that Naofumi was weirdly being painted as the bad guy. But that wasn't until it was blatantly obvious. However, neither of them are as bad as the remaining hero, in my opinion. Itsuki Kawasumi. Not only is he one with his ego in video games, but he's also a white knight on X. What do I mean by that? Itsuki is the most pretentious dick you could meet. Imagine a guy who has an opinion and honestly tries to argue it as if it was fact. That's Itsuki. He doesn't want attention at all, and wants to help people from the shadows. You know, that'd be fine if he was a regular person. But he's a hero, for crying out loud. You could exert some of that power level authority and make your actions mean something. Instead of having everyone thinking that the heroes are sitting around being useless, you can be the hero that you were summoned in as. His justice is something that he enforces as if whatever he thinks is right goes, including throwing a rebellion against a local lord for a struggling village in the aim of decreasing tax rates. Sounds great, right? How is this a bad thing? It's a bad thing because shortly after the taxation decreased and Itsuki left, since he thought they were fine, they got hit with it even harder than before. Then there's also this power privilege side of him that made him kick one of his party members off for being too useless later on in the series. Which, sure, I get it. You're having to fight off a universal catastrophe that is progressively getting stronger with every appearance, and you need strong teammates to actually do it, and Rishio was weaker than the rest of his party at the time. But man, Rishio was devoted to you and was willing to do absolutely everything to help you. Itsuki just went, nah, you're weak, and threw her to the sidelines. He is that guy that thinks he deserves the best of the best because he thinks that he's always in the right. The four heroes do have some fun moments when they're sharing some of their past experiences of when they were in Japan, as well as attempting to share any tips with one another, which derail into arguments very quickly, but even given all of their idiocy, it's not as if any of them are actively trying to sabotage their mission or anything. So, that's what we're dealing with. Three Stooges that each have their own massive egos and problems that make everyone standing up for them also complete idiots. Oh? What's that? There's a group of people that do exactly that? You mean 99% of Melromark? The same nation that they were summoned to? Melromark has a religion that worships the sword, spear, and bow heroes, with the shield being left out, accurately named the Church of the Three Heroes. This religion was founded due to Melromark's racism towards demihumans. Demihumans are often said to worship the shield hero, as previous generations of shield heroes were said to have been preferential to them. So, because the religion actively discriminates against demihumans as if they were devils, the shield hero is also perceived that way by extension. Not only that, but the current king also had a bad history with the previous shield hero. Melromark does have a queen who would have more authority since it's a matriarchy, but she's out settling some political matters. What are those issues? You see, each hero was supposed to be summoned by a different nation, to ensure that the most major nations could have a hero protecting it as well as them being supported enough to do so. What happened instead was that King Trash over here decided it would be a better idea to summon all four of the heroes to Melromark and just fuck with the shield hero. That was the start of Naofumi's predicament. And of course, every church needs to have a figurehead. Enter the high priest of the church, Biscus T. Balmus. He wants to wipe the entirety of Melromark clean with the royal family alongside it, because this round of holy heroes are straight dog shit, with the exception of Naofumi. And we can't have that! He's the shield hero! That would bring shame upon Melromark and their religious practices. The whole killing the royal family part of that goal went unbeknownst to Melty, as she was collaborating with him to rise the ranks and eventually becoming the queen of Melromark. The priest essentially had Melty do his bidding while she was thinking that she had everyone wrapped around her finger. A real Death Note situation. But I digress. So, instead of having the heroes fend off the waves, the High Priest plans to deal with them himself, with a Megazord prototype weapon that combines the powers of all the holy weapons. Granted, to a far lesser degree than the true potential of the real ones, but still powerful nonetheless. Especially when it's being powered by the magic of the hundreds upon hundreds of followers that he has. But he got snapped and there wasn't much of a bigger deal made from it. But I will say, that is the more tame part of Season 1, since it actually contextualizes the inherent dislike of Naofumi and his role as the shield hero. The more what the fuck part is the magic of video editing. After the second wave of catastrophe hit, Glass, this woman in a kimono, came from one of the rifts that were also carrying the monsters, and she utterly bitch slaps the living fuck out of the Three Stooges in one swing of her fan, and Naofumi in another 5 due to the power difference between them. So, after experiencing that massacre, Naofumi realized that he and his party weren't worth shit in combat anymore and needed to get stronger. That's when they learned about the ability to class up, or in layman's terms, limit break, by interacting with the Dragon Hourglass in the church. Which, by the way, a Dragon Hourglass is what shows normal civilians when the next wave is scheduled to hit, so that they can be aptly prepared for it, and can also be used to class up when people have hit their max level limit. But there's exactly the problem. This Dragon Hourglass just so happens to be in the church. You know, the anti-shield church. The king just vetoed Naofumi's class-ups, leaving Naofumi and company stuck at their level cap. That is, until he found out about other nations that actually welcome the shield hero. So, Naofumi decides to head out to one of them. At the same time, the king and Melty were getting chewed up by Melty, that second princess I mentioned earlier. Melty was originally sent back to Melromark by the queen to fix the damage done to the shield hero's name by Altcray and Melty. So yes, the queen, and by extension, Melty is for Naofumi and not against. Melty hears about Naofumi leaving and has this whole spiel about the king and heroes and needing to combine powers because of the waves, and tries to get both Altcray and Naofumi to apologize to each other to clear the air. Unfortunately for Melty, she was being escorted by the knights directly under Altcray's command. Moreover, Malty's command. And Melty's kinda on Naofumi's side, and Malty isn't. So the knights that were escorting Melty before suddenly start trying to eliminate her from the picture entirely. Naofumi does his shield hero thing and protects her, then telling Riftalia and Fila to get these guys the fuck off of them so that they can at least get away with Melty to keep her safe. But they missed one thing. Among those knights, there was one that was recording the entire thing through a crystal ball, who brings it back to the church to add hilariously fake blood, evil faces onto Naofumi's party, and making it look as if he's taking Melty hostage. After which, they reproduced it and spread it around all of Melromark, to make Naofumi and co look like criminals. This is fucking stupid. Anyone that had even one brain cell would have figured out that footage was edited. Moreover, soldiers had supposedly been killed in that, so if anyone that wasn't in on this conspiracy ran into them, that'd have been game over too. Of course, Melty could have also just said that she wasn't being kidnapped since they too also went across the entire country. But no, she doesn't! But when push comes to shove and Melty and the Pope need to throw Naofumi in the rut again, what do? Say that he has a brainwashing shield. What? This shield would supposedly make others follow Naofumi's orders, so the people that think he's making some sense are brainwashed by him, and those defending him aren't thinking straight. But that then becomes justification for Melty to just go, "Oh, holy heroes, you must release my dear sister from this sinister mastermind's clutches by killing her!" And they just agree with her, you know, without asking her how she knows that for sure, or any, I don't know, evidence? So the other heroes just believe her. What is going on? Guys, if Naofumi could have that ability, you would too, as you're all aware that you share the same category of skills prior to this event. How would this be any different? Unfortunately for Melty, after the whole thing with the Pope happened, boys, the Queen is back in town, and all is going right for Naofumi. He got the golden opportunity to have his name cleared and execute both the King and Melty. Except he doesn't go for that second one. No, what he does instead is...
I think the death penalty's too good for these vermin. Death is instant release. Do we really want to let them off as easily as that? So I've got a better idea. From now on, the king's name is Trash, and the first princess will be called Bitch!
Trash?
My name's not Bitch!
It is now, and it will be for the rest of your life.
One of the most legendary clips on AnyTube. Is it cringy? Yeah. Is it just as satisfying? Hell to the fuck yes. But that's not all. The Queen joins in on the fun.
By the way, Melty often uses the alternate name Mine when she's adventuring. How about that?
Yeah, guess Bitch needs an adventure name. How about Whore?
Truly a 10 out of 10 Mother of the Year. This somehow gets the entire audience to abandon the religion that they've believed in their whole lives, and cheer for the guy who they'd been looking at as if he was a devil just a few moments ago. Yup. Well, as nice as it is to see Bitch, get her just desserts by getting her to admit all of the shit she's caused for Naofumi and in all of Melromark, holy shit! She too receives the very slave crest that she was scorning. Yes! After Naofumi's name gets cleared, she becomes Motayasu's bitch. Pun totally... you get the point. Okay, yes. This might all seem very sexist if you're looking at all of this from the surface. But lest we forget, Melromark is a matriarchy, meaning the Queen is actually the highest in power. And of course, have you seen the shit Bitch does in this series? From defamation to robbing a holy hero of their ability to save the world, and attempting to murder her younger princess sister. It's no surprise that this is her punishment in a fantasy world. Speaking of, let's talk about this world. Honestly, out of all the isekais I've seen thus far, this one actually builds on itself, with all the story beats having an ebb and flow to make it feel more natural. There is an actual purpose to everything that Naofumi does that doesn't feel like filler. Partway through the series, Naofumi realizes that he needs money. And since the capital wasn't going to give him any scraps because of their prejudice, Naofumi was on his own. So he quickly learns of these shields' ability to craft items and equipment, so long as it has the appropriate materials to do so. What does he do with that power? He becomes a traveling merchant, and since he can change his shield to look like something else, he can actually get some business. In a way, this series properly gamifies the world, exactly like how you would expect, with how the heroes were all thinking they'd been transported to some game. There are side quests for Naofumi to go on throughout the series. Take the problem of Philo's clothing, for example. Philo is a Philolial queen that can freely transform between human and Philolial forms at will. Unfortunately, what this meant at first was that she'd rip whatever she was wearing when she transformed into said Philolial form. The solution to that being some magic thread. And to obtain said thread, they had to go through some dungeon and fight a boss enemy. Tell me that isn't some MMORPG type shit. This isn't like your Sword Art Online where Kirito goes into floor 20-something of Aincrad and comes out at floor 75 the next fucking episode! There's at least some natural progression in Shield Hero. Season 1, that is. But we'll get there. Oh, we'll get there. But no. While there wouldn't be much world building outside of Melromark in the first season, outside of a few off comments, we do get a more natural sense of progression of both Naofumi as a character alongside the world around him. I think being the shield hero does help him in this way. Due to having no solo offense in the slightest, he has to find all these workarounds to finish off enemies instead of going, The series does start off with having a decent power scaling, relative to how far the plot has gone and the time that has passed. There were few times where I really thought that Naofumi and his party had auto wins with their fights. This is great, since a lot of other isekais just make their main characters ridiculously overpowered and likable right from the gate, but Naofumi has struggles in his fights. Not many, but something that can get you to question whether they'll survive or not. At least, until the plot armor hits the ground sprinting! Everyone, say hello to the Rage Shield, later known as the Wrath Shield. Naofumi can cheat the system by being angry. Hear me out! The Wrath Shield gives Naofumi some insane stat buffs and special abilities that actually do crazy damage, but with it also comes some heavy drawbacks of physical and psychological damage. Not only does this make a last-ditch weapon for Naofumi, but it also exposes his flaws as a person. If only all of that mattered. Because in saying this, Naofumi just pulls it out as his bullshit tactic to get out of every losing battle, with seemingly very small repercussions afterwards. Still, the pacing is somewhat decent since we get a generally good idea of their level progression from how hard of a time they have with each of the waves. Now, that's most of the main story, but there's an arc after all of that. The Calmira Islands. Because you can't have a series without a beach episode! Okay, in all seriousness, the heroes get an invitation to the Calmira Islands to participate in a boosted EXP event that only happens every 100 years. And of course, it happens when the protagonist is there. So they take this as an excuse to have somewhat of a vacation from Melromark. What they didn't realize was that there were more people that got isekai'd into this isekai. Enter Lark and Therese, two adventurers that happened to stumble across this boosted EXP event, and of course, wanted a piece of that cake. So they meet Naofumi's party and join up so that they could grind levels together. Everything goes well for the first few days, all the while Naofumi thinks Lark and Therese are abnormally strong for some random adventurers, but never acts on it. Until Naofumi takes a peek underwater and sees a dragon hourglass that makes him go, oh shit, there's gonna be a wave here. This leads to why Lark and Therese are unusually powerful. Lark is also a hero, but from another world. Gotta love the isekaiception here. They came to this world through the waves, with the goal of eliminating the holy heroes here so that their world wouldn't have to suffer from the waves. Allegedly. Yeah, it really makes no sense, to both the viewer and them. But they're doing it out of desperation. Not that Lark relishes in having to do this, since throughout the several days that they've spent together, he came to see Naofumi as a bit of a comrade. So, he opts to honor him by dueling him personally. Though, that doesn't end up meaning much since it's interrupted by Glass, the woman that kicked the three heroes' collective asses, coming back hungry for more. Glass reveals herself to be an ally of Lark and Therese, and that she is the fan hero of their world. So they all get into a hissy fit before it's interrupted again because some green-haired gremlin pours wine on Glass and the waves end, prompting them to return to their world. All in all, this last part leaves you with a lot of questions and some more mystery. I mean, what are the waves actually? Why do they happen? How does this other world fit into the equation? Just a lot of questions that go unanswered to cap the season off at a nice cliffhanger. So now, I guess comes the overall thoughts of Season 1 of the series. Watching it back, without the initial hype factor, Shield Hero Season 1 has a lot of cracks in how things go. A lot of it was just dealing with bitch and trash that made the entire ordeal feel like some extreme high school bullying that just seemed directionless. Can't forget about that other elephant in the room. Fights were just never done. I mean, they'd start, but somehow never finished properly. They just kept being interrupted. Think about it. Naofumi and Motiyasu's duel for Raphtalia's freedom got interrupted by Multi. Naofumi's confrontation with Glass, the wave ended. This last one at the Calamira Islands, wave ended. The most complete fight we got was Vittoria laying the smackdown on that undead Dragon Rex. But hey, you know what? Even after all this time, the one thing that doesn't disappoint is the music. Holy fuck, Kevin Penkin does some good stuff. Shield Hero Season 1 is one of those watch because you're bored type shows, and not anywhere close to a cinematic masterpiece. On my revisit, I think it came out a bit lukewarm to the series as of this point, although that's about to get a whole lot worse. But yeah, this ends with a cliffhanger going to the god-awful Season 2, which I'll get to talking about soon enough. With that said, thank you for watching me rant about this very middling isekai that I like, because there's gotta be more of where that came from if you liked it. Subscribe to know when that happens, and I'll see you then.